Hey guys, welcome to the As the Leader Grows podcast. I am your host, Ken Joslin, and we are ridiculously passionate about helping business leaders build confidence, gain clarity, and create community. This is like deja vu. We're right in the middle of a podcast, and we have a break. My MacBook gets delivered. They stop our podcast, so we had to just jump back in and do it all over again. I've got an amazing guest today. You guys are going to absolutely love Moira Casaba from Charleston, South Carolina. Amazing guest. We got to connect last week at Amberley Lago's event she did in Raleigh, North Carolina. Number one, welcome. Number two, take a minute to introduce yourself to our audience this morning.
Yes. So such a pleasure to be here, such an honor. And I'm a coach, and I coach a lot, mainly on mindset, high performance. That's like what I'm most passionate about. I used to be in network marketing. So I built a large network marketing business and then kind of pivoted into masterminds and courses and, becoming a published author and speaker and podcaster and all the things that we get to do. And so it's really just my heart to serve people, whether it's teaching people how to grow a business, whether it's teaching people how to kind of unlock their potential to go to the next level. I think those two obviously go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. Having walked the roads that you and I have walked, having found the success that we found, we've learned a thing or two, and there were some pretty dark days for me. And so I just always have known in my heart that I want to just pay forward. I just want to give back what I've learned, what I use, what works for me, and just show other people the way. So
yeah, we talked a little bit off air earlier about your the addict to CEO, which I think is phenomenal. Just the story. Walk us back 23 years. That was one of the things I liked on your Instagram page, was your 23-year coin that you got being sober.
Yeah.
Walk me back 23 plus years ago. And here you are, you've got a problem. And what was the thing that kind of pushed you over the edge to go, hey, I need to get some help?
Yeah, well, rock bottom will do that to you. I grew up in I don't think there's any such thing as normal family, but your average family. I was the youngest of 6 kids, Irish Catholic family. And growing up, I was kind of the, I don't want to say the golden child, but I want to say I was good at everything, right? Like I was the star athlete, the all-star softball player, good at track and field. I got the grades, gifted and talented. And looking back, and this took me a lot of years into sobriety, but looking back, I realized there was just this pressure, right? I was born with that perfectionism personality. And so, hence why I perfected everything I ever tried. Right. But there was also this insane amount of pressure that I truly put on myself. My parents didn't put it on me, but it feels good to be good. It feels good to do good. Oh, yeah. And I think when I found alcohol, 9th grade, and it was just the pressure valve got released for the first time in my life. And having that genetic predisposition to addiction and having done everything kind of with an addict mentality, right? Like, oh, I'm good at this sport. Let me go all in. Oh, I'm good at getting good grades. Let me be perfect at it. And so I've realized probably just in the last 5 to 10 years that is also such a gift, because the thing that made me an alcoholic, the thing that made me an addict and hit rock bottom, is also the thing that allows me to succeed in business. It's the thing that allows me to serve at a high level. But that rock bottom point that you asked me about, it was rock bottom. If I was awake, I was consuming drugs and alcohol. There was no gray area. It was like, it was rock bottom. I started drinking when I was 14. And by the time I was, 19, I was intoxicated 7 days a week. And it's crazy to think back on my life at that point. I grew up in Maryland. I'd run away to San Diego, and my parents knew I needed help, and they kind of tried to come alongside me. And so I pretty much ran away. I was like, and I'm out, and took off to California and just continued to dig that hole for myself, like soul shattered, completely incapable of unshackling myself from addiction, and to the point of suicide. I didn't think I could get sober, live sober, and I didn't see another way out. And so I just thought, I get why so many people struggle with the idea of suicide being so selfish, and I can identify with it so much, because for me back then, it was like, I am such a burden. I bring nothing but darkness to people. The world would be way better without me. Let me do them a favor, and that's where I was. And
so what was the moment? What was the thing that got you to get into AA, to seek recovery, to try to get treatment? What was the switch that was flipped on the inside of you to be able to do that?
The gift of desperation, I think. But it's interesting. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but it just came to mind. There was this moment. And what I remember is I was going to AA, and I couldn't, I was drinking and going to AA, which is not a great idea, but I was incapable of not. And I remember I called a friend in recovery, and it was, the sob story, like, I can't stop drinking. It was just this ask for help, but also it was all about me. I couldn't stay sober. I couldn't do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I will never forget, she said, Moira, I can't talk to you right now. My brother just committed suicide.
Mm.
And I remember hanging up the phone and having that moment of, what am I doing? How selfish can I be? Like, I am dragging other people down. I'm killing myself. And I got to do something. I've got to take the power back. I've got to take ownership, which is kind of interesting, because you're taking ownership, but you're also surrendering, right? You're surrendering to God. You're surrendering to the disease. You're surrendering and finally seeking help. And that was the moment. That was the moment of clarity for me. Yeah.
And then walk me through kind of that process. You're in recovery. When was the moment where you were like, okay, I'm better. Okay, I'm good. Like, because you really had to dig yourself out of the hole.
I don't know if I've gotten there yet, Ken. No.
Yeah, no. But when was the moment really where you started to see, you got out of the, I'm selfish, I can't win, I keep digging a hole, where you got out of the hole and you're like, oh, now I'm actually making progress.
Right.
Because I'm sure that moment in your life is really I'm here, and I have the vision to get here, and now I'm starting to build momentum.
Yes.
Which is really probably the foundation of what you teach everybody and everything that you do.
Yeah. And so much of that is community, right? It's who you're surrounding yourself with, that community that you're in. And I can remember the first 60 days of my sobriety like it was yesterday. It was like white knuckle, sit on my hands, like everything in my power just to not take a drink. And I can remember right around 60 days of sobriety, like I feel like I experienced joy for the first time. Like I experienced like life for the first time in many years. And I kind of saw the light, and I saw how sobriety could feel, that it wasn't this like death sentence. I'm thinking sobriety is a death sentence, even though addiction is the death sentence. Yeah. But when you're 21 years old and you're getting sober, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in a rocking chair for the rest of my life. Right. And I started to, I think the gift now that I really see is, I sought a deeper level spiritually, personally from that young age. When you're faced with that at 21 and you start to go down that kind of that spiritual path and that self-reflection path, and you automatically, especially when you're clear, right? You start to dream, you start to think about what's possible. And I can remember way back then, even like, every New Year's Day, I would like drive up the coast to Laguna and just like take me and my journal and like write down what my goals were for the year. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to do that. But I think there's an intuitiveness in us that, when we start to just write out what we want more of, what we want less of, what we want to accomplish. And so yeah, that's when that path started. And I had some really good people in my life that encouraged me, that encouraged me to a higher level, because I think, especially coming from this place where, I didn't have like insecurity. I felt like as a child, I actually had a lot of confidence because I was good at a lot of things, but dealing with addiction beating you down every single day, your self-worth is completely eroded. And so it took a long time to rebuild that.
And so you got back to you as a teenager where you were, excelling at everything that you did. Walk me through the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey when you went, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. So it's funny. The beginning of my entrepreneurial journey was like, buying candy at the hospital canteen where my mom worked and like marking it up and selling it to my friends in the neighborhood when I was like 8. I really was that kind of entrepreneurial brain as a child. But coming out of early sobriety, I had a couple jobs. I was like managing a yacht brokerage in San Diego, and then I was selling advertising, and I just wasn't finding my thing. I was really in that phase of where a lot of early 20s are, like you're like, what do I want to do? What am I passionate about? And I always thought I was going to pursue medicine. So I always wanted to, that was like, I'm obsessed with health, anatomy, physiology from a really young age. And so I thought that, well, for a long time, I believed I threw that dream away, med school dream. And so I walked into a Pilates studio selling advertising in La Jolla, California for the like local newspaper. And this is so important because I think it's everything. Back then, Pilates wasn't popular, and it was like a 2 to 4 year certification. Like it was super high level and very advanced. I walked into this Pilates studio and I talked to the owner, and I knew like to the depths of my soul that I needed to pursue it. And I remember calling my brother and being like super excited and, just talking a mile a minute. And he was like, you haven't even taken a class yet. Like what? And I didn't have the time, right? I didn't have the time for the certification. I didn't have the money for the certification. I didn't know what it was going to turn into, but I listened to that whisper that just like got me so excited, even though it was completely unknown. And the way that I added it up in my rational brain was like, oh, maybe this is the thing I'm going to do on the side that will provide enough income so I can go back and pursue med school. That makes sense. And so I figured it out and I got trained in Pilates. I did like a 3-year certification in, 9 months or something, because that's how I do everything. And I ended up starting to teach Pilates, and that became, I started as an independent contractor. I remember most of the teachers around me were teaching like 10 hours a week. I was like, why aren't you teaching 40? Like, why aren't you 4Xing, 10Xing your income? And so I had a ton of success with that. And when I decided to move back east to Charleston, I opened up my own studio. And I think I was green, it was like, why wouldn't you open up your own business? But I had a mentor in my life that was like, you shouldn't go work for somebody, probably more than them coming from the West Coast. You need to open up your own studio. And I was like, okay. So I set about, how to start your own business, Chamber of Commerce stuff, the legal stuff. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, but I also didn't believe it could fail. Like, that's kind of the interesting thing looking back, is I always thought, well, worst case scenario, this, and it was never that bad of a scenario, but I really set out that, I just thought they're going to want this. They're going to need this. I'm going to be able to carve out my niche. And so that was my first really successful business for 18 years. I grew it, it multiplied. I hired a lot of people. And it served its purpose. I got to really work on the wellness and the health side with people. But what I also didn't realize I was doing all those years, because I only trained privately, I was coaching people. The part of the reason people came to see me was, I was a great Pilates instructor, but it was the conversation that happened, every hour with individuals one-on-one. And the interesting thing is, what I would love is, I'm never afraid to ask questions. That's why I love doing a podcast. I always really want to know people's stories. So what I found was I was kind of extracting information and then passing it on to others. And I was really able to help people just by being that conduit of information. And that fed my soul. and then years later, I had babies, kind of the next business and the next business. And it was about 8 to 10 years ago, I stepped into coaching, and that was, where everything was kind of unlocked at the next level. I think one thing leads to the next, and you arrive, I believe, if you listen to that whisper and you just keep going, even though you're like, this doesn't really make sense in my head, but my heart's pulling me to it. If you stay on that path, I absolutely believe that you arrive at a point where you're like, it all makes sense.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think Rudy talked about that last week at Amberly's event, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Where he just talked about just get in action. Jim Rohn says speed increases focus.
Yes.
Like the number one thing that I learned from Grant, who's a friend and a mentor, is to take massive action.
Yes.
So many people are afraid to take action. They're afraid to do something on their own, or they want to quote unquote prepare for this. Or I'll never forget, I spoke to all the licensees for Grant down at 10X headquarters. It's been 3 years now. It was like when Grant first launched the licensee, and I was one of the first 50, 60. And there was 30 or 40 of us in the room, and I was speaking to everybody. And I remember Grant went around the room and he was asking, there was one guy that had his licensee for 1.5 years. And he was like, well, how much money have you made? He said, 0. Well, he went to me, and I had only had my license for 2 months. It cost me $25K. I'd already 5x'd it. I already made $150,000 off of it. And he asked the guy, he said, how come you haven't made any money? He goes, well, I'm waiting to get my course done.
Yeah.
Talk about, because we see that.
So passionate about this. Yeah.
We see that a lot.
Yes.
People are waiting for it to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's never going to be perfect, right?
Yes. It's never going to be perfect. And you also have to, I think there was a little bit of a phase for me where I had to dig into successful entrepreneurs and gain the knowledge that they all had to do it messy. I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and she was like, well, I don't want to, all those people that have podcasts have followers. I'm like, well, they have followers because they have a podcast, everyone started with nothing. Everyone started. Brendan Bouchard, who I adore, and I think he's one of the best speakers on the planet. He started and he wasn't good. Everybody started and they weren't good. You just have to start. And the people that are out there doing what you want to be doing, they're there on their path because of that messy, massive action that they have
more reps than you do.
Yes. Yes. More reps. And the only way you get good at selling is by selling. The way you get good at conversations is having conversations. The way you get good at posting on social media is posting on social media. And here's a great example. I can remember when I got my incredibly in-depth, ridiculous Pilates certification, which was next level. It wasn't these, I say that because you can get certified in a weekend now. But I remember the first time I taught, I was terrible. I had the same knowledge. I became really good because I taught a ton of people, right? That's the only way we get good is through action. And so you have to take action. And, one of the things I live by is, and it's in my journal every single day, what are the 3 most important things I got to do? And this, what are the 3 most important things that I got to do that are going to, top 3 that are going to move the needle and let me do those first. And like you, I'm sure 5 times a day, I look down and I'm like, oh crap, what the hell have I been doing for the last 3 hours? I'm not doing the 3 things that move the needle.
Yep.
And bringing awareness to that, and success can be dumbed down into that. I believe if you can get clear every single day on the top 3 things that you need to do and do those things first, you're going to be massively successful.
One of the things that has been just on my heart a lot for the last 2 or 3 years has been how much greater the journey is than the destination.
Oh my gosh.
The journey of the people that you get to connect with, the lives that you get to impact. And I think people think that it's just this destination. Like once I get there, once I speak on this stage, once I get my business to this level, once I get, this many children, or I get this house that I want, or this car that I want, or fill in the blank, they think it's going to give them some level of fulfillment. And the reality of it is it just doesn't.
Because there's always a next level too,
right?
There's always a next level. I became the number one coach, and it was a goal. And I love achievements, and I love driving. Like, I have to have that thing that I'm driving towards. So a few years ago, I was named the number one coach in Beachbody, 400,000 people. And I was number one. And I will never forget the day that I achieved it. I'm out in the backyard, scooping dog poop, doing the same thing. You know what I mean? And I didn't feel any different. I may have been excited and proud for a second, but what happened after that was actually kind of like a depression almost, because so much of my action had been driving towards that goal, and I wouldn't change it. I'm so glad I achieved it. But then it was like, I hadn't looked past it to go like, well, then what? What's next? And what is this all for? You know, and you have to find the joy in the journey. You got to find the gratitude in the day. You got to find, and that comes down to like law of attraction, which I believe is super scientific and God-given. You know, when you can go through your day and just be like, God, life is good. Life is good.
Yeah.
What I think I want, I actually have. Then you get what you want. Right?
Yeah, I love that. You talked about attraction. You know, I'm huge on relationships. I talked to Amber this last week about community circle and corner, about the 12 people that you spend the most time with, and then the 2 or 3 that are in your corner. And man, I've got some amazing people. I mean, I've got some friends. I was just on the phone with Randy Garn just a minute ago, Vic Keller. I talked with Vic this afternoon. I mean, I pinch myself. I'm literally like, man, God, you are so amazing. Talk about some of you talked about attraction. Talk about some of the people that have helped you along the way get where you're at.
Yeah.
And what were some of the things you did to make yourself and what you were doing in your life attractive to people that were at the next level?
Yeah. So I think there's a few important things. I think looking back, you know, I had to make an intentional effort and take action to put myself in a circle of people that were moving in the same direction as me, people that had goals like me, people that were on the same path as me. You're doing the same things, you know, you're kind of in the same business. I think that is super important, right? And a lot of that circle, those were the people that I always say believed in me before I believed in myself.
Yeah.
You know, those things where I would whisper like, do you really think that like I kind of want to be like number one out of 500,000 people. Like, that's crazy. And they'd be like, that's not crazy. You can totally do that. You know, they would just kind of have that, just that belief. And when you see it and hear it from them, you're like, oh my God, they actually believe I can do this. Maybe I can. And so I really think you need that circle of people that believe in you more than you believe in yourself. But I know a lot of people the excuse is, well, I don't have any of those people in my life. Everybody around me takes the winds out of my sails. And I think you can seek out, like, I remember going to Tony Robbins, 8 years ago. That changed my entire life. But what I did when I came home from that event was like, I immersed myself in his work. So he was one of my greatest influences. Tony Robbins doesn't know who I am. I don't know. You know what I mean? We don't have a personal relationship. But he's influenced me probably more than anybody in the personal growth space. And so you can't just have the excuse that they're not in your life. I also think that sometimes you have to step out of relationships, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean breaking up with them publicly, but sometimes you need to step away. And a lot of times the closest people to us are the ones that are cautioning us or telling us that it's not a good idea. One thing is, we have to remember that comes from a place of love most of the time, right? It comes from a place of care and concern and protection. Safety. Yeah. But also, why are we taking advice from people that aren't where we want to go? It's like, I think about my mom, who I love dearly, but I'm not going to take my mom's business advice. Like, she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't an entrepreneur. So I need to seek out people that are where I want to go and listen to them, not the people that are dreaming small that might be living in my house. I think the attraction piece that you're talking about from the outside, drawing people into you, I think we got to be bold in our dreams. I think we got to be bold in who we want to become, where we want to go, what we want to accomplish. I know for me, when I hear women especially speak these like crazy dreams that they have, I'm so attracted to that, right? Like Jen on Instagram, I can't pronounce her last name either. Jen
Zawadzki?
Begins with a G. Gottlieb, I think.
Oh, Jen Gottlieb.
Yeah, Jen Gottlieb.
Yeah, Jen's a good friend.
So Jen and I are like just chatting a little bit back and forth on Instagram. And then I see her post where she's like, I want to be the world's greatest speaker. And I'm like, yes, like you are my people. The person that can boldly proclaim that publicly, like I'm so attracted to that. And I think we as humans, but especially women, need to be more bold in our voice for what we want and what we're going after, because that's the energy that just builds your community. Right?
It's funny. Everything you've talked about for the last, 20 minutes we've been on this call, the one place that I saw your countenance light up and you just go to the next level energy wise was when you talked about seeing the Pilates and you wanted to do it. And you didn't know, because it's vision. It's the power. It's the power of vision. The one thing I would say, and I don't know that I mentioned this at Amberly's event, I talk a lot about is the word encouragement means to add courage to. Yes. And it's like, and I tell people, if you don't have the courage, borrow mine. Right. If you don't have the belief, borrow mine. I've got it for you. And that's exactly what happened to you. You said, hey, I want to be the number one person out of like 500,000. Is that crazy? Yeah. And they're like, of course not. I'll never forget looking at Randy Garn. Randy was at my conference, my first Create conference I did a year and a half ago. And he leans over to me on Friday. Jen Gottlieb's on stage. Jen was speaking for me. Jen was on stage and Randy leaned over and he goes, I know why we're connected. He said, I know why God's connected us. He said, because I'm here to help you get your message out to the world. And when Randy said that to me, it was one of those, Joshua 24 moments. It was a monument moment for me. I knew, I said, okay, this is legit. This is real. Like what we're doing is we're going to make an impact around the world. Yes. So you talked about the vision and how when you have vision, like you just talked about Jen, I want to be the best. Or now you're attracted. Like, yes, I like that. It's that frequency and that vibration and the energy that you put off. Yes. What does an entrepreneur do who is like, I am an entrepreneur, but I seem to be struggling and I'm not attracting some of the people that I need to attract? What would you say to that group of entrepreneurs?
I say you gotta get real self-reflective, because if we're not attracting what we want to attract, then that's on us, right? It's our energy. Just like you said, it's our energy, it's our frequency, and it might even be in our head, right? You might be thinking, I'm showing up, I'm doing the Instagram posts, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But in your head, you're irritated, frustrated, ungrateful. That's the frequency. That's the energy you're putting out, right? And so you have got to self-check that. And, it comes down to simple things like, where's your, health and fitness at? Where's your nutrition at? Where's your personal practices at? Every day I wake up and I'm like, these are the 5 ways that God is showing up in my life today, not in general, not, oh, I live in a beautiful place, but like literally today, this is how God showed up. Because I geek out on brain science and our brains are designed to protect us. They're designed to look for danger and threats and insecurities and all the negative. We have to train our brain. We have to flex that muscle every single day. Yeah. Naturally, default, my brain is going to be like, these are the 50 things. These are the 50 ways the world's against me, right? And so I have to flex that muscle every day. What are the 5 ways that it's working in my favor today? Right? What are the things I'm grateful for? What are the 3 most important things I got to do? And then the 2 other questions I ask myself every day is, what am I excited about? And what am I proud of myself for? Because that's a muscle, right? I remember when I first started doing what am I proud of myself for today? It was like something I'd never pondered, right? It was radically different. And then I found myself, I remember one day in the gym, like doing something, and I literally said it out loud to myself. I was like, so proud of myself, and I was like, whoa, it's starting to trickle in that morning practice of doing that in the morning. It's starting to show up. I'm starting to rewire my mind to look for places where I'm proud of myself. What am I excited about? I can wake up and be like, oh, I got to go to a meeting at 10. I got to do a podcast at 12. I got to go to a basketball banquet at 3. I got to go to a baseball game. What am I excited about? I get to do a podcast with you today, right? I get to go to my kid's baseball game tonight. But I've got to live in that energy and that frequency if I want to attract the right people into my life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So if they don't have obviously some self-assessment things, and they don't have the right energy, what would you say to them? Like, book recommendation. I know you talked about Tony. I love Tony. Book recommendation, podcast recommendation. You talked about self-assessment, which is huge. That's one of my 5 core values is teachability. We're not only open to feedback, but we actively pursue feedback. Like, we're asking people, how did I do?
Yes.
What did you think? Did I connect? Like, even when I give my talks, like, where did I connect the most? Where did I lose you at? And what was missing? Like, I want to know those 3 things so I can connect better with the audience next time.
Right.
What tell me something right now in the last few months in your life that's really fed you, that has really raised your energy level? Book, podcast, relationship. Tell our audience what's really done, what's moved the needle for you in that area.
So many things. I feel like I just immerse myself in listening to books, like I check it off my list every day. Did I read something or listen to something that, gave me new thoughts, opened my mind up to something new? But probably in the last year, and this I also realized was The Power of One More, Ed Milet. That book changed my life. But the reason I realized it's a great book, and I read a lot of great books, but I think the reason it changed my life is because I love him. Right. So when you really connect with somebody's philosophy and the way they talk and the way they teach and what they teach, you pay way more attention.
Yes.
Right. So I can read books and read books and read books, but I love what he does and how he teaches. And so I just went to a deeper level on that book. I also was on a trip. And so I'm a big believer in sometimes you got to step out of your life to examine your life. And so I was in, I think I was in El Salvador when I was reading that book. And so I was kind of able to read it from a reflective standpoint. So that book was super, super powerful. The other thing is, and this is kind of goes both ways, and I know you get this, I have a mastermind of 20 women, and that has leveled me up, even though I'm the one running the mastermind, to the next freaking level. Because when you step into community with people that are operating at a higher frequency, a higher level, you become what you're surrounded with. You really do. I mean, that old cliche saying, you are this, average of the 5 people around you. It's true, And so if you have the opportunity to join a mastermind or a group, and, there's a million of them out there, you don't have to join mine, you don't have to join yours, but find one. I think that is a massive action step that you can take, because a mastermind where there's conversation, connection, and community, and you're gaining knowledge is radically different than listening to a podcast, reading a book. Those things are great, but they're very surface. You got to really connect and do the work, right? Be held accountable.
I the one thing after I met Grant 3 years ago that I used to write in my 10X planner before I created my own was a quote. And when I created my own, now it's printed. I had it printed on the bottom of every page, is get in rooms with people who think bigger than you do.
Yes.
Like, you've got to get in rooms. You've got to get around people. I didn't share this story the other day about Jeff, my best friend who lives in Calabasas. I've got a check right here for $1 million. It's my goal this year. I've got a check written out to myself for $1 million. And I remember when Jeff was asking me my goal and I showed him that check for $1 million. He leaned across, we were sitting outside by his pool, and Helen, his housekeeper, just brought us this beautiful plate of cut up fruit. And we're sitting there, and he leans across, he puts his hand on my knee. He goes, "A month or a week?" I said, no. I said, "You don't understand, Jeff." I said, "My goal is 5.192 million in revenue." And I said, "I want to make $1 million this year." And he's Persian, so he's just very calm and put together. And he puts his hand on my knee again. He goes, "A month or a week?" Like,
yes.
Like I didn't even get it at first.
Yes.
But you know, when you surround yourself with people like that, who, and I say this a lot, like even with my group of people, the circle that I get to spend time with, my corner guys, they love me for me. They don't love me for what I do. They don't love me because they get to be on my stage, or they don't love me because they get to do what they love me because of me, which is amazing. What's the best way for people to get to connect with you, to find out what you're doing, to learn more about you?
Yeah, it's super simple, but not so simple. So Moira Casaba, MoiraKucaba, but that's where you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, website, everything. So that's the advantage of not having a normal name is that, it's super easy to find if you know how to spell it. I love what you just said though, about a month or a week, because that was exactly what happened when I was reading The Power of One More. Over and over and over again in that book, he keeps saying 100 million, 100 million, 100 million. And I never thought in any realm of possibility that could ever be in my life, right? Like it's just not even in the realm of my mind of what's possible. And on that trip, I thought to myself for the first time, and you ask yourself better questions, you get better answers. What could I do in this world to make $100 million? Like, that's like, it's hard to wrap my own brain around that. But I felt like something inside of me was unlocked because I saw solutions, I saw paths, I saw things that I want to create that didn't exist in my brain before I unlocked that level. Right. Yeah.
I shared one of my stories I shared from Grant was 3 years ago when I met him. I was working on a $3 million commercial deal in Atlanta, and I was representing the buyer. The seller was unrepresented, 72-year-old Chinese guy, didn't speak English. His representation was his 22-year-old grad student daughter. My appraisal on a Monday came in at $2.625 million, which meant we were $375,000 short. It was a $78,750 commission. It was gone. I hopped on a mentorship call with Grant. Grant's like, come to Miami, 10X boot camp. I'm like, okay, I vested another 5 or 6K. I went to Miami. Friday was unbelievable. Saturday morning, I walk into a Q&A with Grant, all the mentorship, like 20 of us. And I pitched the deal. And he just looked at me and he goes, Ken, buy the building. I'm like, I've done $250 million in real estate transactions. I've done a lot. It's not like I've been doing it for a long time. And he looked at me and he goes, buy the building. And I was like, and he leaned across the table. He calls me preacher. And he goes, preacher, just buy the building. If your client overpays for it today, when he's done with it, somebody will overpay for it from him. I called my client at 5 o'clock on Saturday. I said, hey, Steve, it's Ken. I'm down here at this thing in Miami called 10X Boot Camp with a guy named Grant Cardone. Oh, I love Grant Cardone. I've got money invested in Cardone Capital. Well, fantastic. Let me tell you what he told us to do. So I flew home. I negotiated a seller held second on Monday. We closed on Wednesday. I made $78,750. And I would have never made that money had I not gotten that room with Grant. And he let me see something I could not see.
Yes.
He helped me see something I didn't think was possible.
Right. That's just what I'm saying. It wasn't even in your brain's capacity
And I'd done at that time 200 to 225 million in real estate transactions. Not like I wasn't achieving at a very high level.
Yeah.
I just wasn't at that level.
You know what I love about that story is that pivotal point where you took the massive action to invest and go to Miami. When you're at a rock bottom, you're like, this is the end of the friggin' road. Oh my God, I'm devastated. You immediately invested in your future and took action that led to that. That's where most people stop, right? That's where most people stop. In the hardest of times, they pull back when they actually need to be leaning in. And I see it all the time in entrepreneurship, income starts to go down. So people are pulling back. I'm like, no, this is when you drive harder. This is when you invest more. And what I know is when they say, when you pay attention. When you invest in yourself, you show up at a higher level. I remember the first time I invested $100,000 in like a coach. I thought that was the most insane, ludicrous thing I've ever done in my life. The second I did it, I showed up differently. Like the second I did it, I'm like, I'm the type of person that drops $100,000 on a personal investment in coaching me, because I started operating at a whole nother level. the very first time I walked into a meeting with my coach 2 weeks later, I was like, I got my money's worth. He's like, what? And I was like, what has taken place in my brain in the last 2 weeks? Because there was $100,000 on the table. I better make some decisions. I better get into action. I better start driving forward fast, because I'm not going to spend $100,000 and then keep overthinking things and stay put.
Right.
You've got to invest in your future. Right.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, the biggest investment you make is in yourself. I remember the first
100%.
10K ticket. I remember the first $100,000 I spent on coaching and all the things that, that we invest into me to help me become me. Well, listen, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you, Moira. Again, that's Moira Casaba.
Yep.
I nailed that right there. I should get an A for that. Moira Kucaba on Instagram, on the internet. Check her out, guys. She's absolutely crushing it. What an amazing conversation geared around leadership development, and just how to grow as a human being and become the best version of yourself. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
It was a blast. Father, thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us today for the As the Leader Grows podcast. I am your host, Ken Joslin. Listen, if this has blessed you, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things. Number one, hit that like button, subscribe button. If you're listening to this podcast right now on your iPhone, snap a screenshot, share that over on Instagram. Moira and myself will share that and give you a little love from our audience as well. And again, thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode.